Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 6 preview. Recording this after a terrible Game Week 5, so I can understand your thoughts and feelings. Obviously, some managers still did incredibly well. Some people own Salah, some people who own some differentials who did great this week. But this is naturally just a week where a lot of people struggled. A lot of people who sort of have template teams struggled. And that's not to say that the template team is bad, but that these weeks do happen, but we can also recover. And I think the overriding logic as well at times is if you've picked a player for a run of games, usually try and see that run of games out. I can understand, of course, the frustration has sort of reached a fever pitch with, let's say, ownership of Chelsea or United players. But for example, United players, I'd be a little bit more confident with them than, let's say, maybe a Jackson, for example, when you have ample replacement options going forwards. And this is sort of what the preview series will try to do today. We'll be actually looking at answering questions like what to do with the forwards, what to do with the defenders, such as, let's say, Chilwell, who, for example, now presents himself as a semi-problem, midfield transfers, should we sort of FOMO into Salah or keep the midfield as is? And then lastly, of course, goalkeepers. Now that, of course, Pickford has another bad fixture on paper, before he has two good ones on 7 and 8, if you're frustrated, if you have a transfer, if you have two free transfers, whether you move out of Pickford as well. So in terms of the forwards this week, for Jackson, of course, he's going to be the big topic point because he's going to be, and he already is actually, the leading transfer out to someone like Alvarez. And I can understand why that is. Previously, I've actually been telling people not to go from Jackson to Alvarez and to sort of see out Jackson's fixtures. And you saw that Bournemouth away game, which in my opinion on paper was actually a better game than, let's say, Alvarez's West Ham game. And now we've actually seen Alvarez effectively play 5 full games from Man City. Pep very highly praising him, which of course doesn't actually mean anything because that's been done before and people have lost their positions after that. But Jackson, of course, on 4 yellow cards is another big problem, right? 4 yellow cards means he's 1 game away from suspensions, and that's a problem. So I do think that owning Jackson is probably going to be something that a lot of managers will refuse to do after this week, and I can understand why. And ultimately, all I'll say is wait for the Champions League game to happen and then make that transfer to Alvarez, because at least you're trading up Jackson from a worse fixture, which is going to be Aston Villa at home, into, let's say, Alvarez versus Nottingham Forest at home, a much, much better game. So in that situation, I would much prefer Alvarez. And I do think Man City, for example, will rotate a lot in the Champions League as well, because their matchup is going to be Red Star. And that matchup actually seems very, very simple compared to, let's say, a tougher Champions League game, if we're being honest. We've seen Pep actually rotate in the Champions League before. I think even though this is the first fixture in the Champions League, we're very likely to see something like that again because City actually have a lot of games to play and they even have a very, very tough EFL Cup game. So if there's any time to rotate, it's probably this game, and I think it'll happen. So Alvarez seems like he's gotten very good minutes. He has the confidence of Pep. So I think when you're looking at, let's say, after Champions League, seeing hopefully that Alvarez is fit, not injured, you can make that move from Jackson to Alvarez then. Capturing price rises is not as important as, let's say, avoiding injuries and getting additional information. As far as other transfers, if you don't, let's say, want to go to Alvarez, or you already own Alvarez but have Jackson in your team as well, so let's say you have 3 forwards, I do think this is the week to actually consider simply just going towards Morris, right? Because this is a good fixture on paper for Morris, and Morris will have 2 fixtures as well in double game week 7, unless, of course, he gets a red card like Lyle Foster. So Morris as well is a very good transfer in as well. The sort of differential pick that I have for this week, though, is actually going to be someone like Edouard. Edouard actually has really, really good underlying stats so far. Now, he's not under the radar because he's actually done incredibly well. He's scored a lot of goals already. But actually, the beautiful thing about him scoring so many goals and actually being consistent is that he's actually got really good underlying stats. So when you compare it to, let's say, someone like Awoniyi, who hasn't blanked so far, the key difference is actually Awoniyi's expected goal involvement per game is much less and a complete shadow compared to, let's say, Edouard. Now, of course, Awoniyi as well has Man City, and Edouard actually has some sort of good and bad games in between, and you'll see, for example, Eze has similar situations, right? But Edouard's underlying stats being so good and his minutes being so good actually make me think that he's probably still a much better differential pick than even someone like Awoniyi, and he'll definitely, for example, be getting a cheat sheet rise as well this week. So I do like those 3 forwards in that sort of order: Alvarez, Morris, and Edouard. And that's sort of my opinion on the forwards this week. If you want to go out of your forwards, even if, let's say, you want to go out of Watkins, you could do it. But I would also say practice a little bit of patience with Watkins, because at least Watkins has been returning almost every game so far. Mostly assists, of course. We have still yet to see a proper goal from Watkins. But right, you're looking at Watkins where he could be an easy transfer in game week 8 because the Aston Villa run after that is fantastic. So you only really have to sort of suffer 2 more games where Watkins doesn't have elite fixtures until he really just has a supreme run. So this could be the week where you want to go out of Watkins if, let's say, Alvarez is the player you want to go for. But unless you really have some really powerful midfield or defender moves to make and you need upgrades in terms of your budget, then I would actually probably keep Watkins. In terms of other forwards, let's say if you own João Pedro or Ferguson, I mean, simply play these forwards this week. This is a great fixture to actually own these players. I wouldn't be advocating for people to move into them just because Brighton's fixtures after Game Week 6 are also very, very tough. As far as, let's say, defender transfers this week, clearly Chilwell now looks like a problem. And actually, the reason why I think Chilwell is a very simple transfer out is because he's probably not worth his price. At that sort of price, even though Chilwell has really good underlying stats so far, a lot of the underlying stats were accumulated as a left winger. So now that we're actually seeing Cole Palmer in the team, coming on as a sub, Mudryk getting starts, and even though Pochettino has mentioned that he wasn't very happy with, let's say, how green, I suppose, that the Mudryk performance was, the reality is he doesn't particularly, see, let's say, Chilwell as being the dominant left winger. And that's why, for example, we haven't seen too many minutes so far where Chilwell, let's say, slots back into left back when he's done with left wing, or, even that benching, for example, in the previous game that the commentators mentioned as a knock in Game Week 5. Pochettino didn't make any mention to the knock at all in the press conference. And in fact, he talked about how some of the fullbacks as well were playing way too advanced, which left a lot of space in behind. Now, I also think that Pochettino was actually just talking about, mistakes that he wasn't so happy with, but also that he wasn't super critical of it. He understood why this was the case because he understood that his team wanted to chase. I don't think he, for example, is extremely upset with, let's say, Colwill or Chilwell, who both played left back in that game, or even, let's say, Malo Gusto on the right-hand side. So I don't think there's a need to overreact in that sense, but the simple reality is you have players like Trippier who now have a good run. We can finally see that Newcastle got a clean sheet as well. The reality is the next 2 fixtures are also super good for clean sheet opportunities, and you'll see that as well in terms of clean sheet odds. So this is the week for me to actually go towards a Newcastle defender. It's very simple. I would actually still go, in terms of preference, I would actually go Botman first, then Trippier, then Schär. Now, Trippier is very expensive, right? That's a reality. And you might not want to be spending so much money on the defense. But I have to say that he's an absolute guarantee in terms of underlying stats. Because so far with Schär, we've seen much less shots than he usually does. And you could argue that's actually simply because Newcastle have been facing very tough teams. But the reality too is that Trippier's, let's say, consistency with getting expected goal involvement, even in tougher games, bears out and has borne out very well. That could be, for example, even a tactical adjustment, right? Sometimes you don't want your center back taking too many shot opportunities. Botman himself is also getting onto a lot of great opportunities in set pieces. I don't think Schär is, for example, that much better than, let's say, Botman at set pieces. So I would say even though Schär last season had an incredible expected goal involvement, it is also rather unlikely that a player will consistently be such an amazing goal threat. Now, we have players in the past who've been like this, Shane Duffy, Virgil van Dijk, but the reality is I don't think Schär is of that sort of frame where he is that much of an elite aerial threat either. So I do actually like Botman in the order first and then Trippier. But Trippier is sort of a luxury transfer where if you've got a lot of money in the bank and you don't have plans to getting Salah for, let's say, the next 3 to 4 game weeks, then go for someone like Trippier instead. Punt on that sort of attacking upside that he has. Because he is on all those set pieces, and I'm really not concerned about his minutes. He's been very fit so far. We saw him play 3,300 minutes last season. You'll struggle to actually find too many defenders who actually match that sort of level of output as a fullback. So in terms of him, let's say, having some tough games, yes, of course, that's true. But at least there's a couple days rest, 4 days of rest between the Champions League game versus AC Milan and then that Sheffield United away game. And then, of course, Newcastle have some home games. So I do have a lot of faith in terms of these Newcastle players locking down their minutes. You can even argue that, let's say, Newcastle have easier games in the Premier League, but they've already lost a lot of games and they have a lot of points to reclaim. I really struggle to see that they'd be playing their second string players. And if anything, Lewis Hall is probably their best backup player so far. And we still haven't really seen him sniff too many minutes. And he's been the most competent player, as I said. And that's the thing. We'll probably see Lewis Hall come in for Dan Burn at times. But Livramento versus Trippier is a much larger drop-off in my opinion. That's just sort of my opinion. I do think that these players are nailed. I'll be going with Trippier myself. If you don't believe that, then it's very tough to actually sort of envision a good defensive transfer this week because Rico Henry himself has gotten himself injured. So if you're actually looking, let's say, to replace someone like Rico Henry, who seemingly has some sort of ACL issue, it's very hard to not go towards Botman. If you let's say, sidestep Botman, I guess what you could do is actually go for a Crystal Palace defender this week. If you only need to plug a hole for this fixture, then maybe just go towards the Crystal Palace defender. And that's probably going to be the other solution that I have. As far as midfield transfers this week, what I'll be suggesting you to do is, if you've got 2 free transfers, give a thought to how easy it is for you to go to Salah. If it's not easy for you to go towards Salah, then don't go towards Salah. If you have 1 free transfer, definitely don't go towards Salah. I don't think it's worth, for example, breaking up your team structure, taking hits to go into Salah and an ill-opportune sort of fixture opportunity. Yes, of course, he hasn't blanked so far, but it's the same logic as, for example, Taiwo Awoniyi. Would we use the same logic with Taiwo Awoniyi versus Man City? Probably not. Now, of course, Salah, of course, is a completely different level of player, but that's just the logic, right? Salah has blanked before, and he will blank again. As far as Salah, though, when we go back to that, the fixtures are still very tough, in my opinion, just in terms of how much you have to sacrifice when you actually move into a 12.5 million player. So, yes, of course, Salah has been great, but actually the United players that you're owning, even the Spurs players arguably, or even, let's say, Raheem Sterling, these sort of picks can still be very good competing versus Salah up until game week 9, when Liverpool truly have a golden run of fixtures. And it's at that point in game week 9 when I'd be more concerned about owning Salah, and it's only then really where I'd consider moving into Salah as well as a manager myself. So that's my sort of thoughts on Salah. I think if you actually have the opportunity, you have a great luxury in your team, and you can go to Salah, why not sort of go towards Salah? But for now, I think you can actually consider the midfield as a position where you should hold, right? You want to get more information as possible. Son, we need to see, for example, if he gets consistent starts or whether Richarlison will take his spot away. These are the tough fixtures to sort of suss that out. Madison as well, we're getting more information that he's probably going to be that leading Spurs player. And it's an unfortunate thing because obviously we had a great opportunity to sort of punt on Son as a midfield player, actually playing as that central striker versus Sheffield United, and it didn't really work out. So I do think if you're a Son owner, you can cautiously hold him because we do know Son can also thrive in tougher fixtures. But Madison still, I would argue, is probably the talisman of that team. However, the fixtures are very tough. So in my opinion, you wouldn't be transferring in Spurs players, but game week 8 is another opportunity to move into Spurs players. And if you're already ahead of the curve by owning 2 Spurs players, then I would just sort of commit to this sort of holding pattern for now, because it's not like, for example, Salah has supreme fixtures. It's not like Diaby or Eze, cheaper players, have supreme fixtures as well. So there's no real need, in my opinion, to move away from any of your picks this week. And if anything, if you don't have Mbeumo, he's the only transfer that I would suggest to go into, because Mbeumo has a fantastic double fixture run. And as I've been saying so far this season, he does seem like a player who can actually be a talisman going forwards, because unless he literally has 3 games back-to-back where it's like City, Liverpool, Newcastle, he's more than likely going to be an awesome goal threat. And at that sort of price, you can't really get away from that. So that's going to be my assessment of the midfielders. If you really are looking for a budget midfielder and you're trying to, let's say, squeeze Salah into your team, I do think Eze and Gordon are there. Gordon being Anthony Gordon from Newcastle, Eze, of course, being the Crystal Palace penalty taker. Arguably not the talisman anymore because Edouard's playing so well, but both him and Edouard have great underlying stats. Eze actually has been the one so far who's sort of failed to deliver compared to Edouard, who's actually performed really well in terms of getting the actual points, getting the goals, getting the assists. And Gordon so far has been great. He's actually gotten really good minutes so far, has started a lot of games, and I think that he's actually become a better option than Almiron. So the fact that, let's say, Eddie Howe is putting so much confidence in Gordon and his sort of intense press, his ability to sort of take on defenders, really gives me confidence about Gordon, but it also makes me concerned about punting into Newcastle players, because we know, for example, when you look at, let's say, Isaac getting multiple starts in a row, there's still going to be a time where Gordon can be benched. There's still going to be a time where, as we saw this week, where Wilson can be coming into the team and actually benching Isaac for the entire game. So that's a point of concern, and I think that's always going to be the asterisk when you move into a Newcastle player. As far as the goalkeepers, when we're looking at that, yes, of course, if you're absolutely sick and tired of Pickford and you really do have an opportunity to move away from one of your goalkeepers, then Flecken is still there. Flecken has 2 good fixtures back-to-back now, Everton and then Nottingham Forest. However, I would still say the goalkeepers probably is the position where you actually least want to waste a transfer. Sanchez is actually another great keeper as well. In fact, I probably saw the best Sanchez performance in my life in that Chelsea game versus Bournemouth. Very shocking to actually see Sanchez make good saves, hold the ball up well, not make mistakes with his handling, and he did that. So credit to him for that. Whether that's going to maintain itself, I don't know. Still, though, Chelsea actually, at 4.5, we hope that the defense, if anything, have actually been a little bit better than the offense, right? When we look at this Chelsea team so far. So actually, considering that Sanchez is at a very, very good price, compared to, let's say, Kepa, who was priced at 5.0. Sanchez is actually still a very, very good keeper, because even though Chelsea's fixtures will get tougher, I do think that he's still going to be a good pick going forward, someone who can still be capable of making saves. So Sanchez and Flecken are sort of my favorite single game week keepers. And the reason why I've moved away from Leno is because this is just how FPL is, right? You've moved away from a Luton fixture where Leno would have been a good pick, right, on the wild card. And now you have an opportunity to jump onto players like Sanchez or players like Flecken. So that's sort of the way I see things right now. And as far as, let's say, Raya, of course, yeah, he got a start and he got a great performance, even got into triple or double bonus points, I believe, in that game versus Everton. But the thing is, too, is Arteta was very adamant that the rotation will happen. I think maybe we probably just want to wait and see. Arsenal have some very tough fixtures up ahead. Only a good fixture on paper of Bournemouth, which is still an away game. And then you've still got Tottenham and Man City mixed in between. I wouldn't jump onto Raya for now. However, once again, with the keepers, you probably can actually hold. Like, I'm a Pickford owner myself. I've only got one free transfer, and I'm not going to be moving away from Pickford this week. That's just my take on that. Pickford has still a good game week 7, a good game week 8. I'll probably give him that. And maybe if I actually am forced to wild card for whatever reason, then I can move away from Pickford then. But for now, I think I'll be keeping Pickford. And right now, a lot of people just aren't keeping clean sheets. Even people who are keeping clean sheets are actually struggling to get good bonus points as well. Now, we saw Raya do that because he got one of those kind of classic Ederson performances where you win 1-0, you actually passed an absolute heck of a ton. You didn't even have to make a save, really. I think Raya only made one, and you're getting onto double bonus points. But those sorts of games are actually pretty rare. And the fact that now Raya is moving into a team where he's making less saves per game, just because Arsenal are much more resolute as a defense, much more ball dominant, just means that on the off chance that you get that one goal on target that's really, really well shot and you lose it, then Raya's not going to get the opportunities he had last season as a Brentford goalkeeper to get save points, to get additional bonus points as well from just being a very well-rounded keeper. So those are my opinions so far for the week, and that's going to be the Game Week 6 preview. If you guys can actually like the video, that would be absolutely lovely. If we can hit the 400 like target and break that, that would be absolutely lovely. Comment below what your transfer issues are. Who are your priority transfer targets out? Who are your priority transfer targets in? Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.